The morning I woke up to find a bright orange violation notice stapled to my front door in Asheville, North Carolina. I knew my peaceful winter was about to get complicated. I had moved into the Riverside Meadows subdivision 6 months earlier. A quiet man named Donovan, who just wanted to live simply and affordably in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The notice claimed my heating method violated community standards and demanded I switch to conventional natural gas or electric heat within 30 days or face daily fines of $200. I stood there in my thermal shirt and jeans, holding my morning coffee, staring at the notice with genuine confusion. My heating method worked perfectly. It was efficient, clean, and cost me almost nothing to operate. I had installed a rocket mass heater in my basement, a type of wood burning system that used minimal fuel while producing maximum heat through thermal mass. The chimney was discreet, barely visible from the street, and I burned so little wood that my neighbors probably never even noticed the occasional whisper of smoke. The notice was signed by Brenda Ashworth, the HOA president, a woman I had met exactly once during my move in orientation. She had seemed pleasant enough then, talking about community events and neighborhood watch programs. Now her signature sat at the bottom of this ridiculous violation like an accusation. I pulled out my phone and called the number listed on the notice. A crisp voice answered after 2 rings. Riverside Meadows HOA, Brenda speaking. Hi Brenda, this is Donovan from 4782 Willow Creek Drive. I just received a violation notice about my heating system. Oh yes, Mr. Donovan. Her tone shifted immediately, becoming sharp and officious. We have received multiple complaints about smoke coming from your property and the unconventional heating apparatus you have installed without proper approval. I took a slow breath, keeping my voice level. I submitted all the required permits to the county before installation. The system is completely legal and up to code. It passed inspection. County approval is not the same as HOA approval, Mr. Donovan. Our covenants clearly state that any modifications to home systems require Architectural Review Board approval. You never submitted such a request. I walked back inside, phone pressed to my ear, and grabbed the thick binder of HOA documents from my kitchen counter. I had read through them before buying the house, and I was certain there was nothing about heating systems specifically. Can you point me to the exact section that covers heating systems? I asked, flipping through pages. Section 12, subsection 4, paragraph 3. All external modifications including but not limited to chimneys, vents, and exhaust systems must be approved. I found the section. She was technically correct, though the language was vague enough that I genuinely had not thought it applied. My chimney was a simple metal pipe, maybe 6 inches in diameter, tucked behind my roofline. It was far less intrusive than the massive brick chimneys on several other homes in the neighborhood. I apologize for the oversight, I said, trying to be diplomatic. I would be happy to submit a retroactive approval request. The system is already installed and inspected, so it should be a simple approval. I am afraid that is not possible. The board has already reviewed your situation, and we have determined that rocket mass heaters are not in keeping with the aesthetic and safety standards of Riverside Meadows. You will need to remove it and install a conventional heating system. My grip tightened on the phone. Brenda, that would cost me thousands of dollars. The system I have works perfectly and is completely safe. Can I at least present my case to the board? The next board meeting is in 3 weeks. You may request 15 minutes to speak, but I should warn you that the decision is unlikely to change. We take community standards very seriously. I hung up feeling frustrated but not defeated, 3 weeks gave me time to prepare. I spent that evening researching HOA law in North Carolina and documenting everything about my heating system. I took photos, gathered my permits, and compiled efficiency data. My rocket mass heater used approximately 1/10 the wood of a traditional wood stove, burned so cleanly that emissions were barely detectable, and maintained comfortable temperatures throughout my entire 2,000 square foot home. The next morning, I drove to the county building department and requested copies of all my inspection records. The inspector who had signed off on my system, a weathered man named Tom Chen, happened to be there. "Isaac Wright," he said, recognizing me. "How is that rocket heater working out?" "Perfectly, but my HOA is trying to make me remove it." Tom shook his head. "That is a shame. That was one of the cleanest installations I have seen. You did your homework. Would you be willing to write a letter confirming that? Maybe attend the HOA meeting?" "Sure thing. Those systems are brilliant if they are built right, and yours is textbook. I will put together something official for you." Over the next 2 weeks, I reached out to everyone I could think of who might support my case. I contacted the engineer who had helped me design the system, a professor from the University of North Carolina at Asheville who specialized in sustainable building practices. I found 3 other rocket mass heater owners in western North Carolina who agreed to provide testimonials. I even hired a certified emissions tester to measure the output from my chimney, which came back cleaner than most natural gas furnaces. I also started asking questions around the neighborhood. My next-door neighbor, an elderly man named Robert Martinez, was out raking leaves when I approached him one afternoon. "Robert, have you noticed any smoke or problems from my house?" I asked. He looked genuinely puzzled. "No, not at all. Why do you ask?" I explained the situation. His expression darkened. "Brenda," he said, shaking his head. "She has been on a crusade lately. Last month she tried to fine the Hendersons because their mailbox was the wrong shade of black. The month before that, she made the Patels remove their vegetable garden because it was visible from the street. Did anyone actually complain about my heating system? I doubt it. Most people probably do not even know it is there. Brenda walks around with her clipboard every weekend, looking for violations. It is her hobby. This information was valuable. If there had been no actual complaints, then Brenda was simply enforcing rules for the sake of enforcing them. The night of the HOA meeting arrived cold and clear. I loaded a box full of documents, photos, and my laptop into my truck and drove to the community center. The meeting room was set up with a long table at the front where the 5 board members sat, and rows of chairs facing them. About 20 residents were scattered throughout the room, most looking bored or resigned. Brenda sat in the center of the board table, flanked by 4 other members I did not recognize. She was exactly what I expected. Perfectly styled blonde hair, crisp blazer, and an expression that suggested she had never been questioned in her life. "We will now hear from Mr. Isaac Donovan regarding the violation at 4782 Willow Creek Drive," Brenda announced, checking her watch. "You have 15 minutes. I stood and moved to the front of the room, setting up my laptop to project photos onto the wall screen. "Thank you for your time. I am here to discuss my home heating system, which the board has classified as unconventional and in violation of community standards. I want to explain what a rocket mass heater is, why it is safe and effective, and why I believe it should be approved." I clicked to the first image, a cutaway diagram of how the system worked. A rocket mass heater is a high-efficiency wood-burning system that uses a unique combustion chamber and heat exchange method. Unlike traditional wood stoves that send most of their heat up the chimney, This system captures that heat in a thermal mass, usually a masonry bench or wall, which then radiates warmth for hours or even days. Several residents leaned forward, clearly interested. Brenda's expression remained neutral. I continued through my presentation, showing photos of my installation, the county inspection certificates, the emissions testing results, and comparison charts showing fuel efficiency. I played a short video of the system in operation, demonstrating how cleanly it burned. This system costs me about $40 per month in wood, compared to the estimated $250 I would spend on natural gas for equivalent heating. It produces fewer emissions than a gas furnace, requires no electricity to operate, and provides reliable heat even during power outages. I turned to face the board directly. I understand I should have sought approval before installation, and I apologize for that oversight. However, I am asking the board to consider the facts. This system is legal, safe, efficient, and minimally visible. It enhances my property value and reduces my environmental impact. I have letters here from the county inspector, a university professor specializing in sustainable building, and 3 other rocket mass heater owners in the region. I handed copies of everything to Brenda, who accepted them with visible reluctance. "Are there any questions?" I asked. One of the other board members, a middle-aged man with glasses, raised his hand. "How much smoke does this produce? Can your neighbors see or smell it?" The emissions testing report shows that smoke is minimal and well below EPA standards. The system burns at such high temperatures that combustion is nearly complete. I have spoken with my immediate neighbors, and none were aware of any smoke or odor. Brenda cleared her throat. "Mr. Donovan, while your presentation is thorough, the issue remains that this is an unconventional system that was not approved. Our community standards exist to maintain property values and aesthetic consistency. Allowing one homeowner to install whatever heating system they choose sets a precedent that could lead to all manner of unconventional modifications. With respect, Brenda, several homes in this neighborhood have wood-burning fireplaces that produce far more smoke and emissions than my system. The Johnsons on Maple Street have a traditional wood stove. The difference is that my system is more efficient and cleaner." "Those are conventional approved systems," she countered. An older woman in the second row stood up. "I would like to speak." Brenda looked annoyed but nodded. "Mrs. Patterson, this is not a community forum." "I do not care. I have lived in this neighborhood for 22 years, and I am tired of this board acting like petty dictators. This young man has done everything right except fill out one of your forms. His presentation shows his system is safe and clean. What exactly is the problem?" A few other residents murmured agreement. I saw Robert Martinez nodding vigorously from his seat. Brenda's face flushed. "Mrs. Patterson, we have procedures for a reason." "Procedures that you enforce selectively," Robert called out. "My daughter had to wait 6 months for approval to paint her front door, but the Williamses put in a whole pool deck without approval and nothing happened." The meeting was getting away from Brenda. She banged her gavel, a little plastic hammer that looked ridiculous. "Order. We will take Mr. Donovan's materials under advisement and vote at next month's meeting. This discussion is closed." I returned to my seat, uncertain whether I had helped or hurt my case. Several residents stopped me on the way out to express support and ask questions about the heating system. By the time I reached my truck, I had given my phone number to 6 different people who wanted to know more. The next morning, I received an email from Brenda. The board had voted, and the decision was unanimous. My rocket mass heater was not approved and must be removed within 30 days. Fines would begin accruing immediately if I did not comply. I sat at my kitchen table, feeling the warmth radiating from the masonry bench that ran along my basement wall, and made a decision. I was not going to remove the system. Instead, I was going to fight back the only way I knew how, with education. I spent the rest of the day creating a flyer. The headline read, "Free Community Class, Learn about Rocket Mass Heaters and Sustainable Home Heating." I included photos, basic information, and the time and location. My house, the following Saturday at 10 in the morning. I printed 200 copies and spent Friday evening distributing them to every mailbox in Riverside Meadows. I also posted the information on the neighborhood Facebook group and Nextdoor. By Friday night, 40 people had responded saying they would attend. By Saturday morning, that number had grown to 63. I set up folding chairs in my basement and living room. My rocket mass heater was the centerpiece, the masonry bench warm to the touch, even though I had let the fire burn out that morning. I prepared handouts with technical specifications, cost comparisons, and instructions for anyone interested in building their own system. The doorbell started ringing at 9:30. Within an hour, my house was packed. People spilled out onto the front lawn despite the cold. I counted at least 80 attendees, including several people from outside the neighborhood who had seen the online posts. Brenda appeared at 10:15, marching up my driveway with 2 other board members flanking her like security guards. "This is a violation of the community event policy," she announced, pointing at the crowd. "You need a permit for gatherings of more than 20 people. I had anticipated this. This is a private event on my property. These are my invited guests." The community event policy applies to events held on HOA common areas. The parking situation is unacceptable. Your guests are blocking mailboxes and driveways. I looked at the street. A few cars were parked along the curb, but everything was legal and nothing was blocked. "Everyone is parked legally. If you would like to file a complaint with the sheriff's office, you are welcome to do so." Brenda's jaw tightened. "This is not over, Mr. Donovan. You are welcome to stay for the class. You might learn something." She turned and stalked away, her entourage hurrying to keep up. I began the presentation in my basement where everyone could see the system up close. I explained the basic principles, demonstrated how the feed tube and combustion chamber worked, and showed the masonry work that stored heat. "The beauty of this system is its simplicity," I said. "It uses physics that have been understood for centuries. Hot air rises and thermal mass stores heat. By combining these principles efficiently, you can heat an entire home with a tiny amount of fuel." An older man raised his hand. "How much does it cost to build?" "Mine cost about $3,000 in materials. I did the labor myself. If you hired someone, you might spend $5,000 to $7,000 total. Compare that to $15,000 or more for a new furnace system." A younger woman asked, "Is it difficult to maintain?" "Easier than a regular furnace. You burn a small fire once or twice a day during cold months. There is minimal ash to clean, no filters to change, and no mechanical parts to break." I showed them the exhaust measurements, explaining how complete combustion meant almost no creosote buildup and minimal air pollution. I talked about the independence from utility companies, the resilience during power outages, and the satisfaction of heating your home with renewable local resources. The class lasted 3 hours. People asked endless questions, took photos, and touched the warm masonry with wonder. At least 20 people took handouts and said they wanted to build their own systems. A local reporter who had heard about the conflict showed up and took notes. After everyone left, I felt energized. This had gone better than I could have hoped. The article appeared in the Asheville Citizen-Times on Tuesday. The headline read, "Local man teaches community about efficient heating after HOA violation." The piece was balanced, explaining both the HOA's position and mine, but the photos of the crowded class and the quotes from attendees made it clear where public sympathy lay. Brenda called an emergency board meeting that Thursday. I knew because several sympathetic residents texted me about it. The board was furious about the negative publicity and wanted to escalate enforcement. The next violation notice I received was even more aggressive. It cited additional violations. My firewood stack was visible from the street. My basement window did not match the others on my house because I had installed a small vent, and my landscaping had not been properly maintained. The fines now totaled $800 and were increasing daily. I consulted with a lawyer named Jennifer Morrison who specialized in HOA disputes. She reviewed my case in her downtown Asheville office, a converted brick building with views of the mountains. "You have a strong case," Jennifer said, tapping her pen on the stack of documents I had provided. "The HOA is clearly targeting you, and some of these violations are absurd. However, fighting them in court will cost you thousands in legal fees, and even if you win, you will still have to live in a community where the board hates you. What are my options? You can pay the fines and remove the heater, which I do not recommend since you would be out significant money and left without heat. You can fight each violation individually and drag this out for months, or you can go on the offensive." "What does that mean?" Jennifer smiled. "HOAs have to follow their own rules. If they are not, that gives you leverage. I suggest you start attending every board meeting, requesting copies of all HOA financial records, and documenting every inconsistency in how they enforce rules. Make yourself the most informed, most persistent homeowner they have ever dealt with. Often, when faced with someone who will not back down, boards will settle to avoid the hassle. I like this approach." I paid Jennifer a retainer and left with a checklist of actions to take. That weekend, I submitted formal requests for 5 years of HOA financial records, meeting minutes, and all architectural review decisions. North Carolina law required HOAs to provide these documents to homeowners within 30 days. I also started photographing every violation I could find in the neighborhood. Wood piles, unapproved paint colors, unauthorized landscaping changes, broken mailboxes, and a dozen other minor issues that the board had ignored while targeting me. At the next board meeting, I arrived early and took a seat in the front row. When the meeting opened, I raised my hand during the homeowner comment period. "I would like to address the selective enforcement of community standards," I began, projecting a slideshow of photos onto the screen. "Here are 47 documented violations throughout Riverside Meadows that have existed for months or years without any action from the board. Meanwhile, I am being fined for a legal, safe heating system and minor aesthetic issues that appeared only after I challenged the initial violation." Brenda tried to interrupt, but I continued. "I have also requested 5 years of financial records and meeting minutes, which I am legally entitled to review. I look forward to examining how the board has handled similar situations in the past and whether fines have been assessed consistently." The room was silent. Several board members exchanged nervous glances. An older board member named Frank Delgado spoke up. "Mr. Donovan, perhaps we can discuss this more productively in a closed session. I prefer transparency, but I am willing to meet separately if the full board agrees." They agreed. We scheduled a meeting for the following Tuesday at the community center. Jennifer came with me to that meeting. All 5 board members were present, along with the HOA's attorney, a tired-looking man named Richard Simmons who kept rubbing his temples. Richard opened the discussion. "Let us be frank. This situation has become unproductive for everyone. The HOA is receiving negative publicity, and Mr. Donovan is facing mounting fines. We would like to propose a resolution." "I am listening," I said. "The board is willing to retroactively approve your heating system if you agree to make minor modifications to improve the chimney's appearance and maintain certain aesthetic standards for your firewood storage. All fines will be waived." I glanced at Jennifer, who gave a slight nod. "What modifications?" I asked. Brenda pulled out a list. "The chimney cap should be black instead of silver, and the wood pile needs to be screened from street view." These were trivial changes. "Agreed." "I also want a written apology from the board acknowledging that the heating system is safe and legal, and a commitment that the HOA will not pursue further action related to this issue." Richard nodded. "We can draft that." "One more thing," I added. "I want to teach a quarterly class about alternative heating systems at the community center, promoted by the HOA as an educational resource for residents." Brenda looked ready to explode, but Richard cut her off. "That seems reasonable. It demonstrates community value and could help prevent future misunderstandings." We spent another hour working out the details, but eventually everyone signed an agreement. I walked out with Jennifer, feeling victorious but exhausted. "Well done," she said. "Not many people push back this effectively against an HOA. Most just give up." Over the next month, I painted my chimney cap black and built a simple lattice screen around my wood pile. The board provided the written apology, and I framed it next to my county inspection certificate. I also prepared for my first quarterly heating class. This time, it was official and advertised in the HOA newsletter. The response was even bigger than before. The community center's main room held 150 people, and every seat was filled. I brought props, including small models showing how different heating systems worked. I invited Tom Chen from the County Building Department and Professor Sarah Rodriguez from UNCA to speak about building codes and sustainable design. The class expanded beyond rocket mass heaters to cover solar thermal systems, heat pumps, radiant floor heating, and passive solar design. The local news covered it again, this time framing it as a positive community story about education and sustainability. Several attendees started their own alternative heating projects, and 2 hired me as a consultant, creating a nice side income. Brenda attended the class, sitting in the back row with her arms crossed. Afterwards, she approached me cautiously. "I am obligated to admit that was informative," she said, the words clearly difficult for her. "Thank you for coming. I still think you should have sought approval first. You are probably right about that, but I am glad it worked out this way. A lot of people have learned something valuable." She gave a tight nod and left. We were never going to be friends, but the war was over. The next board election happened 6 months later. Brenda chose not to run for another term, citing other commitments. 3 of the 5 board positions turned over, with new members who were more focused on community building than rule enforcement. I continued teaching the quarterly classes, which became popular enough that I started offering them beyond Riverside Meadows. I spoke at sustainability conferences, consulted on a dozen rocket mass heater installations across North Carolina, and even wrote a detailed guide that I sold online. My heating bills remained minimal. My house stayed warm and comfortable through the coldest winters. And every time I sat on that radiant masonry bench in my basement, feeding a few sticks of wood into the efficient combustion chamber, I felt satisfied knowing that I had not just won a fight with an HOA, but had educated an entire community about something valuable. A year after the initial violation notice, I received a letter from a couple in Charlotte who had read about my situation. They were facing a similar battle with their HOA over solar panels. I spent 2 hours on the phone with them, sharing everything I had learned about HOA law, documentation, and strategic resistance. They won their fight 3 months later. That became another side project. I created a website called HOA Education Network, where homeowners could share stories, strategies, and resources for dealing with overzealous associations. The site grew slowly but steadily, connecting hundreds of people across the state. One evening, about 14 months after everything started, I was sitting in my living room when my phone rang. It was Tom Chen from the building department. "Isaac, I have something interesting for you. The state is updating the building codes next year, and they are adding a section specifically recognizing rocket mass heaters and other alternative heating systems. Your case got some attention at the state level, and they want to make sure inspectors have clear guidelines." That is fantastic news. They want someone to consult on the language. I recommended you. Would you be interested? I agreed immediately. Over the next 6 months, I worked with a committee of engineers, inspectors, and policymakers to develop clear, sensible code language for alternative heating systems. The work was technical and sometimes tedious, but it felt important. The updated code was published in late autumn, and I was invited to speak at the State Building Department's annual conference. Standing at that podium in Raleigh, looking out at hundreds of building professionals, I thought about how far things had come from that first orange violation notice on my door. Alternative heating systems like rocket mass heaters represent a return to principles that worked for thousands of years, I told the audience. They are not unconventional. They are just unfamiliar to modern builders and inspectors. With proper guidelines and education, we can make them accessible to homeowners while maintaining safety and building standards. The presentation was well received. Several counties adopted the new guidelines immediately, and building departments began reaching out for training. Back in Riverside Meadows, life had settled into a comfortable routine. The new HOA board was reasonable and focused on actual community improvements rather than petty enforcement. They organized neighborhood barbecues, maintained the common areas properly, and handled legitimate issues with fairness. I still taught my quarterly heating class, which had become something of a neighborhood tradition. Attendance varied, but there was always a core group of people interested in learning about energy efficiency and sustainable living. My consulting work grew enough that I cut back my hours at my regular job as a software developer. I spent more time traveling to consult on heating projects, speaking at conferences, and writing detailed guides. The income was modest but steady, and the work felt meaningful. 2 years after the initial conflict, I attended a regional sustainability fair in Boone, North Carolina. I had a booth set up with models and handouts about alternative heating. A woman approached in the afternoon looking vaguely familiar. "Are you Isaac Donovan?" she asked. "I am." "I am Margaret Chen, Tom's wife. He has told me so much about you." "I teach environmental policy at Appalachian State, and I would love to have you speak to my class about your experience navigating local regulations for sustainable home systems." I agreed, and that led to more university speaking engagements. I discovered I enjoyed teaching, especially working with students who were passionate about making buildings more efficient and sustainable. The financial impact of my rocket mass heater continued to be significant. Over 2 years, I had saved approximately $5,000 in heating costs compared to what I would have spent on natural gas. The system required minimal maintenance, just occasional cleaning and inspection of the chimney. Other homeowners who had built rocket mass heaters, after taking my class, reported similar savings and satisfaction. A network of alternative heating enthusiasts developed across western North Carolina, and we shared tips, troubleshooting advice, and design improvements. One spring morning, about 2.5 years after everything started, I received a formal letter from the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association. They were giving me their Community Education Award for my work promoting energy efficiency and sustainable heating systems. The award ceremony was in Durham at their annual conference. Standing on stage accepting the plaque, I looked out at an audience of environmental professionals, engineers, and activists. I thought about Brenda and that first violation notice, and I felt grateful for how things had turned out. In my acceptance speech, I talked about the importance of persistence, education, and not letting bureaucratic obstacles stop you from doing what you know is right. When my HOA said my heating method was unconventional, they probably thought I would just comply and remove it, I said. Instead, I taught a class about it. That decision changed not just my situation, but created a ripple effect that has touched hundreds of lives. Never underestimate the power of education to transform conflict into opportunity. The audience applauded, and afterwards, dozens of people approached me with questions and stories of their own battles with regulations and HOAs. I drove back to Asheville that evening feeling content. The mountains were green with early summer growth, and the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. I thought about all the unexpected directions my life had taken from one simple decision to heat my home efficiently. When I pulled into my driveway on Willow Creek Drive, I saw Robert Martinez watering his garden next door. He waved and I walked over. "How was the conference?" he asked. "Good. They gave me an award." "Well deserved. You know, you could run for the HOA board. The neighborhood could use someone with your perspective." I laughed. "I do not think I am quite ready for that level of involvement. Think about it. You have already proven you can deal with difficult situations." I promised to consider it, though I was not sure I wanted to spend my time in board meetings. But the suggestion stuck with me. That summer, I focused on growing my consulting business and developing new educational materials. I created a series of video guides for building rocket mass heaters, which I posted online for free. They accumulated tens of thousands of views and generated hundreds of comments and questions. I also continued to refine my own heating system. I experimented with different wood types to maximize efficiency, adjusted the airflow to optimize combustion, and documented everything meticulously. My basement became a laboratory for testing and improvement. In late summer, a production company that made home improvement shows contacted me. They wanted to feature my story and my heating system in an episode about alternative energy solutions. I agreed, and a film crew spent 2 days at my house shooting footage and interviews. The episode aired that fall on a home renovation network. The response was overwhelming. My website crashed from traffic. My email inbox filled with hundreds of messages. People from across the country wanted to learn about rocket mass heaters and share their own stories of fighting HOAs over sustainable home improvements. I hired a part-time assistant to help manage the volume of inquiries. Her name was Diana Foster, a recent graduate from UNCA with a degree in environmental studies. She was organized, passionate about sustainability, and excited to help build the educational resources. Together, we created an online course about rocket mass heaters that went far beyond my quarterly in-person classes. It included detailed video modules, downloadable plans, interactive quizzes, and a community forum where students could ask questions and share their projects. The course launched in early winter, priced affordably at $99. Within a month, 200 people had enrolled. By spring, that number had grown to over 1,000. The income finally allowed me to leave my software job entirely and focus full-time on education and consulting. Throughout this growth, I never forgot the original conflict that had started everything. I stayed involved in HOA reform efforts, speaking at meetings and workshops about the importance of balanced regulations that protect community interests without stifling innovation and sustainability. I worked with state legislators on proposed laws that would limit HOA power over energy-efficient home improvements. The bills faced opposition from HOA management companies and some board members who viewed them as threats to their authority, but public opinion was shifting. More people recognized that overly restrictive HOAs were obstacles to environmental progress. One day, about 3 years after the initial violation notice, I received a call from Brenda Ashworth. I almost did not answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Isaac, this is Brenda," she said, her voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "I wanted to let you know that I am moving. My husband got a job in Tennessee and we are leaving Riverside Meadows." "Okay, thank you for letting me know." I also wanted to apologize. Not formally, I mean, we already did that legally, but personally. I was wrong about your heating system. I was wrong about how I handled the situation. I let my need for control override common sense. I was genuinely surprised. I appreciate you saying that. I have been thinking a lot about leadership and what it means to serve a community. I was so focused on rules and standards that I forgot about people. What you did, teaching those classes and fighting back, it forced me to reconsider my approach. I have been reading about alternative energy, and I actually installed solar panels on our new house in Tennessee. We talked for another 20 minutes. It was the longest and most genuine conversation we had ever had. When we hung up, I felt a sense of closure I had not realized I needed. As my 4th winter in Asheville approached, I reflected on everything that had changed. My simple desire to heat my home efficiently had evolved into a career, a community, and a movement. The rocket mass heater in my basement continued to work perfectly, radiating warmth through the cold months while using minimal fuel. The quarterly classes at the Riverside Meadows Community Center continued, now taught by me and several graduates who had become experts themselves. The classes had expanded to cover not just heating but overall home energy efficiency, from insulation techniques to renewable energy systems. Diana had become invaluable, managing the online course, handling consulting inquiries, and developing new educational content. We hired 2 more part-time staff to keep up with demand. One evening, I was reviewing enrollment numbers for the online course when Diana knocked on my office door. "You need to see this," she said, pulling up a video on her laptop. It was a news segment from a station in Oregon. A homeowner there was fighting his HOA over a rocket mass heater, and he cited my case as precedent. He had used materials from my website and online course to build his system and prepare his defense. The segment showed him teaching his neighbors about the technology, just as I had done. "This is incredible," I said. "The ripple effect keeps spreading." Over the following months, I heard from similar cases in Colorado, Vermont, Montana, and New Mexico. People were standing up to restrictive HOAs and using education as their primary weapon. Many were winning, and even when they lost initially, the publicity and community support often led to eventual policy changes. I compiled these stories into a case study report that I shared with legislators, building departments, and HOA reform organizations. The report demonstrated that alternative heating systems were gaining acceptance, and that overly restrictive regulations were increasingly seen as outdated. By the 5th year after my initial conflict, the landscape had changed significantly. Rocket mass heaters and other alternative systems were specifically recognized in building codes across 12 states. Several HOA reform bills had passed, limiting associations' power to prohibit energy-efficient improvements. And the awareness of these systems had grown from a small niche community to a broader movement. I continued to live in Riverside Meadows, in the same house with the same heating system. The neighborhood had become friendlier and more diverse in the types of homes and improvements people made. Solar panels dotted roof lines. Several residents had installed rain barrels and composting systems. The community garden had expanded into a showcase of sustainable landscaping. The HOA board, now completely turned over from the original members, asked me to join as an advisor on sustainability initiatives. I accepted, figuring it was time to work from inside the system rather than always pushing against it. In that role, I helped develop new guidelines that encouraged rather than restricted energy-efficient improvements. We created a streamlined approval process for solar panels, alternative heating systems, and other sustainable modifications. We also launched community programs for bulk purchasing of renewable energy equipment, which reduced costs for everyone. The transformation was remarkable. Riverside Meadows went from being a typical restrictive HOA community to a model of how neighborhood associations could promote sustainability and innovation rather than stifle it. I still taught classes, though less frequently as I had trained others to carry on the work. I still consulted on heating projects, especially for complex or large-scale installations, but more of my time went to writing and advocacy work. I published a book called Heating Revolution: How Alternative Systems Are Changing Homes and Communities. It told my story, but also featured dozens of others, creating a comprehensive look at the movement toward more efficient home heating. The book did well enough to require a second printing. Looking back on those 5 years, from the morning I found that orange violation notice to the present day, I was amazed by the journey. What had started as a frustrating conflict with an overzealous HOA president had become a career, a purpose, and a way to make a real difference in how people thought about energy and housing. My heating bills remained minimal, usually less than $50 per month, even in the coldest winters. The system required little maintenance and had become such a natural part of my daily routine that I barely thought about it. Feed some wood in the morning, maybe again in the evening, and enjoy comfortable warmth all day. But the broader impact was what really mattered. Hundreds of people had built similar systems after taking my classes or courses. Thousands had learned about energy efficiency and sustainable living through my educational work. Building codes had changed. HOA policies had changed. And a small but growing number of communities were rethinking how they approached home heating and energy use. On a cold December morning, exactly 5 years after that first violation notice, I stood in my basement looking at the rocket mass heater. The masonry bench was warm, radiating stored heat from the small fire I had burned earlier. The system looked exactly as it had that first winter, simple and efficient. My phone buzzed with a message from Deanna. Another news station wanted to interview me about HOA reform legislation pending in Virginia. I replied that I would do it, then made a cup of coffee and sat on the warm bench, feeling grateful for everything that had happened. The conflict with Brenda and the Riverside Meadows HOA could have gone very differently. I could have given up, removed the heating system, and paid the fines. Instead, I had chosen to educate, to persist, and to turn a negative situation into something positive. That choice had made all the difference, not just for me, but for hundreds of others who now had warmer homes, lower bills, and the satisfaction of living more sustainably. The HOA said my heating method was unconventional, and they were right. But unconventional did not mean wrong. Sometimes, unconventional meant better.